He once told me he saved me from that apron. 10 years later, I was still wearing it. People said silence keeps peace. They were wrong. It just hides the truth. Until you serve it cold. Hi, I'm Erin. If you like real stories about betrayal and quiet revenge, make sure to subscribe. And tell me in the comments what you would have done. The reservation list came in every afternoon at 3. I arrived early to prep the glassware, fold linen napkins into perfect triangular points, and ensure the candles on each table were trimmed to exactly 2 inches. These details mattered at Cascade, the kind of waterfront restaurant where people celebrated anniversaries and closed business deals over wine that cost more than my weekly paycheck. I had worked there for 8 years, long enough to know which tables tipped well, long enough to recognize the names that appeared on the list. Before I saw their faces, that Tuesday afternoon, I was polishing stemware when Marcus, our manager, called my name from the host stand. "Erin, you'll take table 12 tonight." Table 12? The corner booth with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Elliott Bay. Reserved for VIPs, regulars, investors. The kind of table where conversations happened in low voices and contracts changed hands between courses. I walked over, looked at the screen. Martin Hayes. Party of 2. 7:30 p.m. My hands didn't shake. I had learned that years ago. Control started in the fingers, moved through the wrists, settled in the shoulders. If your body stayed still, people assumed your mind did too. "Erin?" Marcus was watching me. "Yes," I said. "Table 12. I'll handle it." He nodded and turned back to his screen. He didn't know Martin was my husband. Very few people at Cascade did. Martin preferred it that way. He had explained it to me once years ago. Sitting in our kitchen with his coffee and his Wall Street Journal. "It's better if they don't know we're connected," he'd said. "People respect boundaries. They'll feel more comfortable." What he meant was, I don't want them to see you as my equal. I finished the glassware, moved to the dining room to check my station. The afternoon light came through the windows in sharp angles, turning the water beyond into hammered silver. I had always loved this view. It was one of the reasons I stayed. The other reason was that Martin co-owned the building. Leaving Cascade would mean explaining why, and I wasn't ready to explain why my husband stopped seeing me as one of them. And Martin hated explanations that made him look small. By 6 o'clock, the kitchen was in full motion. The sound of searing pans, the rhythmic chop of knives, the low hum of the ventilation system. I tied my apron tighter, checked my hair in the reflection of a wine fridge. Everything in place. Everything controlled. Party of 2. That detail sat in my chest like a stone. Martin never dined alone, but he never told me when he was coming in. He treated Cascade like his private club, a place where he could be seen, admired, untouchable. I had served him twice before, both times with clients. He'd smiled at me the way you smile at competent staff, polite, distant, grateful for the invisibility I provided. But tonight was different. Tonight, he'd made a reservation under his own name. That meant intention. That meant performance. I pulled my order pad from my apron pocket. Clicked my pen twice. A habit I'd developed to steady my breathing. 7:30 arrived, and so did they. She carried the calm of someone who'd never worried about bills. Her name was Brooke Devon, Martin's ex-girlfriend, the one he swore he hadn't seen in years. And now she was walking into the restaurant I worked in, wearing a silk blouse, the color of champagne and heels that clicked against our marble floors like punctuation marks. Her hair was dark, swept back, held in place by something invisible and certainly costly. She smiled at the host. She did not look at me. Martin followed 2 steps behind her, his hand resting lightly on her lower back, guiding her, claiming space. He wore the charcoal suit I'd picked up from the dry cleaner last week. I recognized the tie. I'd given it to him for Christmas. Marcus led them to table 12. I watched from the bar, counting my breath. In through the nose. Out through the mouth, 4 counts each. When they were seated, I approached. Shoulders back, expression neutral. "Good evening," I said. "Can I start you with sparkling or still water?" Martin looked up. His eyes registered me for half a second. No surprise. No discomfort. Just the mild acknowledgement you give someone whose function is clear. "Sparkling," he said. Then, turning to Brooke, "You still prefer Pellegrino, don't you?" She laughed. Soft. Warm. The kind of laugh that suggested history. "You remember everything," she said. I poured their water. The sound of liquid hitting crystal was the only noise at the table. Brooke studied the wine list. Martin studied her. I stood 3 feet away, hands folded, waiting. "We'll start with the Chablis," Martin said, not looking at me. "The Domaine La Roche." I wrote it down. My handwriting was steady. "Any appetizers this evening?" "The oysters," Brooke said. Her voice was smooth, modulated, the kind of voice that had been trained in boardrooms or courtrooms, or places where words carried weight. "And the burrata, we'll share. I nodded, turned toward the kitchen. Behind me, I heard Martin say something low. Brooke laughed again. I didn't look back. In the wine cellar, I found the Chablis. Checked the vintage, wiped the bottle clean. When I returned, they were leaning toward each other, forearms on the table, fingers nearly touching. Brooke was saying something about permits. Martin was nodding, his expression intent, engaged. He never looked at me that way anymore. Not in years. I opened the wine table side, poured the tasting portion into Martin's glass. He swirled it once, sipped, nodded. I filled Brooke's glass first, then his. Neither of them said thank you. People at table 12 rarely did. Martin glanced up at me as I stepped back. "You remember Erin, don't you? She's been here for years. Very steady." Brooke's eyes flicked toward me, polite and empty. "Of course. She's been with Cascade for years," Martin continued, gesturing vaguely in my direction. He was talking to Brooke, but loud enough for me to hear. "Cascade's been good to her." Brooke glanced at me. Her smile was polite, distant, the kind of smile you give furniture that's been tastefully arranged. "It's charming," she said, looking around the dining room. "You've kept it so charming, Martin. You've kept it." As if he owned it. As if it was his to curate. I brought their appetizers, set the plates down with precision, described each dish in the practiced language of fine dining. Brooke asked a question about the burrata. I answered. She nodded, satisfied, and went back to her conversation with Martin. I moved through the rest of the service on autopilot. Their entrees, refilled water glasses, cleared plates, brought dessert menus. They ordered 1 chocolate torte, 2 spoons. I delivered it without comment. At 9:15, Martin asked for the check. I printed it, placed it in the leather folio, set it on the edge of the table. He didn't look at it, just slipped his card inside without breaking eye contact with Brooke. I processed the payment, returned the folio. Brooke had been sorting through papers while he signed the receipt, organizing them into a stack on the leather bench beside her. One sheet had slipped free, white against dark upholstery. The corner folded back just enough. A manila envelope, small and flat, resting on the bench seat beside Brooke's purse. The corner of a document peeked out. I saw my name on the top line, Erin Hayes, printed in sans serif. Official. My pulse kicked once, hard, then settled back into rhythm. I didn't ask, didn't stare. I just memorized the angle of that envelope. Then I finished clearing their dessert plates, wished them a good evening, and stepped back into the shadows of the dining room where I belonged. They left 20 minutes later, Brooke's hand on Martin's arm, his laughter carrying across the room like he owned the air itself. When I returned to table 12 to clear the last of the glassware, I found cash tucked under the edge of a napkin. $40, folded neatly. A tip. I picked it up, slipped it into my apron pocket. The envelope was gone, or maybe it had never really been meant for me to see. But I had seen my name. I had seen the crisp edge of legal paper. And I understood with perfect clarity that something had been decided about my life while I poured their wine. That night they left a tip on the table. I didn't know it held my name. The last guests left at 10:40. By 11, the dining room was empty. Just chairs upturned on tables and the smell of lemon cleaner cutting through the air. I worked my closing routine the same way I always did. Counted my tips, folded them into my apron pocket. $43 plus the 40 from table 12. 83 total. Not bad for a Tuesday. Jason, the night manager, locked the front door and flipped the sign to closed. He moved through the space, turning off lights in sections. First the bar, then the lounge. The dining room stayed lit while I finished wiping down my station. "You good, Erin?" he called from the host stand. "Almost done," I said. He nodded, went back to counting the till. Jason had worked at Cascade for 3 years. Younger than me. Quieter. He asked few questions. That made him easy to work with. I carried the last of the glassware to the kitchen, set it in the wash station, untied my apron. That was when I felt it. Something in the pocket. Not bills. Paper. Folded. I pulled it out. A receipt. Printed on thermal paper. The kind that fades after a few weeks if you don't store it carefully. It wasn't mine. I unfolded it under the fluorescent light above the prep station. The print was small but clear. A transaction record from a copy shop on Capitol Hill. Timestamp 2 days ago. Sunday afternoon. Notarization services $25. Document copies 8 pages, $4. Rush processing $15. Below that, a handwritten note in tight script, Hayes finalized Tuesday. My pulse stayed even. My hand stayed still. But something shifted in my chest. A door opening onto a room I hadn't known existed. This receipt had been in Brooke's purse. Or Martin's jacket. It had fallen. Slipped free when they were sorting papers at table 12. And somehow it had ended up in my apron pocket. Maybe when I cleared their dessert plates. Maybe when I folded the napkin with their tip. I read the line again. Notarization services. Documents get notarized when they need to look official. When signatures need to be verified. When someone wants proof that a person agreed to something. A receipt alone wouldn't prove whose signature was notarized. The copy shop's CCTV, intake log, and the notary's journal would fill the blanks. I folded the receipt. Slipped it into my jeans pocket. Walked back to the dining room. Jason was turning off the kitchen lights. The restaurant was nearly dark now. Just the safety lights along the baseboards and the glow from the emergency exit signs. Jason, I said. He looked up. Yeah? Do we keep security footage from the dining room cameras? He frowned slightly. Yeah. Marcus reviews it once a week. Why? I think I dropped something earlier. Wanted to check. He studied me for a moment. Then shrugged. Systems in the back office. You know the login? I do. Don't stay too late, he said. I'm locking up in 20. I nodded. He left through the side door. I heard his car start in the alley. Then silence. I stood in the empty dining room. Table 12 was clean now. The candle removed. The chairs upturned. No trace of what had happened there just hours ago. But I had the receipt, and I had a name printed on a document I wasn't supposed to see. Aaron Hayes. I walked to the back office. Pulled the door closed behind me. Sat down in the desk chair. The computer was already on. Screensaver rotating through images of Cascade's signature dishes. I touched the mouse. The screen came to life. I didn't open the security system yet. First, I needed to think, to reconstruct exactly what I'd seen. The envelope had been small. Manila, standard office size. Brooke had been sorting papers. One page had slipped out, white against the dark leather bench. My name in sans serif print at the top. Below that, words I hadn't been able to read fully. But I'd seen enough. Investment transfer. Signature of Aaron Hayes. I pulled the receipt from my pocket again. Laid it flat on the desk. The paper was thin, already curling at the edges. Notarization services. Someone had notarized a document with my name on it. A document I had never signed. A document I had never seen until tonight when it appeared at table 12 between my husband and his ex-girlfriend. I opened my phone. Searched for the address of the copy shop listed on the receipt. Capitol Hill. 15 minutes from our house. 3 blocks from Martin's office. The pieces were assembling themselves. Slowly. Quietly. Like a puzzle where every edge locked into place. I set my phone down. Stared at the dark window above the desk. My reflection looked back at me. Calm. Composed. The same face I wore when serving wine. When clearing plates. When pretending not to notice conversations that excluded me. But underneath that face, something had changed. I wasn't confused anymore. I wasn't guessing. I knew. Before I left the restaurant that night, I already knew where I had to look. The security system at Cascade was simple. 4 cameras, 1 above the bar, 1 covering the entrance, 1 in the kitchen, 1 in the main dining room. The dining room camera had a clear view of table 12. I was designated to access the system during close. It was part of my shutdown checklist. I clicked through the interface. Found Tuesday's footage. The timestamp read 003122 just after midnight, but the recordings were indexed by the time they captured. I scrolled backward. Found 7 p.m. Pressed play. The screen showed the dining room from above. Wide angle, black and white, grainy but functional. I watched myself move through the frame, carrying water glasses, pouring wine, setting down plates. My movements were efficient, practiced. I looked small on the screen, unimportant. Martin and Brooke sat facing each other. Their body language was easy, familiar. Brooke laughed at something Martin said. He leaned forward, touched her hand briefly, then pulled back. I fast-forwarded, watched the evening compress into seconds, courses appearing and disappearing, glasses refilling, the rhythm of service reduced to silent choreography. At 8:47 p.m., something changed. Brooke reached into her purse, pulled out the manila envelope. Set it on the table between them. Martin picked it up, opened it, removed several pages. I paused the footage, leaned closer to the screen. The pages were white, standard letter size, text visible even in the grainy black and white. Martin held them up to the candlelight. Brooke pointed to something on the second page. He nodded. I hit play again. Martin pulled a pen from his jacket, signed the bottom of one page, then another. Brooke took the pages, folded them, returned them to the envelope, but she didn't put the envelope back in her purse. She set it on the bench seat, beside her. Out of immediate view, I watched myself enter the frame, clearing their dessert plates, my back to the camera. Brooke's hand moved, adjusting the envelope, sliding it closer to the edge of the seat. Then I left the frame, and the envelope stayed. I rewound, watched it again. This time I focused on the moment when Brooke had the papers spread on the table. I paused, zoomed in as far as the system allowed. The text was soft, but the title line, the consent label, and my name were unmistakable. Investment Transfer Agreement. Spousal Community Property Consent Aaron Hayes. Transfer of ownership interest in Cascade Holdings LLC. My name. On a document transferring ownership of something I didn't own. I sat back in the chair. The office was silent except for the hum of the computer and the low buzz of the refrigerator in the kitchen beyond the wall. This was fraud. Simple. Clear. Documentable. Martin and Brooke had forged my signature on an investment transfer, probably to move assets, to restructure ownership, to cut me out of something I should have been part of, or to implicate me in something I knew nothing about. The receipt in my pocket made sense now. They'd gone to a notary, had the document stamped, made it look official, legal. But I had never signed anything. I pulled out my phone, took a photo of the screen showing the timestamp and the visible text on the document, then another showing Martin and Brooke's faces clearly visible as they handled the papers. The footage wasn't perfect, but it was evidence. I exported the clip at full resolution, logged the system timestamp and hash value, and saved duplicates to a USB and the backup drive. I sent a preservation email to the manager's account. Screenshots were backup, the source was sealed. I closed the security program, logged out, turned off the monitor. The office felt colder now, or maybe I was just noticing it for the first time. I had spent 10 years married to Martin, 10 years being reminded that I was lucky, that he had saved me, that without him I would still be working double shifts at diners where the tips were small and the work was hard. He'd been wrong about one thing. The work was still hard. I was still wearing an apron. But I wasn't the same person he thought he'd rescued. I had documentation now. A receipt, security footage, a clear record of fraud. Martin thought silence meant acceptance, that I would serve his table and never ask questions, that I would see my name on papers I didn't sign and assume it was beyond my understanding, but he'd underestimated what silence could hold. I stood, pushed the chair back under the desk, walked through the dark restaurant to the front door, unlocked it, stepped outside. The Seattle air was cold, damp, the kind of night that smelled like rain even when it wasn't falling. I pulled my jacket tighter, started walking toward my car. Tomorrow I would make copies of everything. The receipt, the photos of the security footage. I would find a lawyer, someone who handled fraud cases, someone who understood that forgery didn't require violence to be criminal. Martin and Brooke had made their plan at my table, in my restaurant, while I poured their wine and cleared their plates. They thought I was invisible, but invisibility had given me something they didn't expect. I had been watching, listening, memorizing, and now I had proof. Invisibility wasn't submission anymore. It was chain of custody. I hadn't slept. By the time the sky turned gray, I was still at the kitchen table. Martin's side of the bed was empty. He hadn't come home. That detail registered without emotion. Just fact. I poured another cup of coffee instead of starting a new day. The apartment was silent except for the hum of the refrigerator and the city beyond the window. Quiet in that suspended way mornings get after a sleepless night. Seattle mornings in October felt like exhaling. Cold air, damp pavement, light that took its time arriving. I pulled the USB drive from my jacket pocket, set it on the counter beside my phone, the receipt from the copy shop, the printed screenshots I'd made before leaving Cascade, all of it arranged in a line, evidence waiting to be organized. I opened my laptop, created a new folder, labeled it documentation, dragged the exported video file into it, added the photos, scanned the receipt using my phone and saved the image. Everything timestamped, everything traceable. Then I opened a browser, Searched for the Washington Secretary of State Business Registry, Cascade Holdings, LLC. The filing came up immediately. Registered address matched the restaurant. Registered agent Martin Hayes. Formation date 6 years ago, right after we'd been married for 4 years. Right when Martin said he was investing in the building with 2 other partners, I clicked through to the ownership structure. 3 names listed. Martin Hayes, 40%. Douglas Fenwick, 35%. Aaron Hayes, 25%. My name. Right there. Official. Filed with the state. 25% ownership. A quarter of Cascade Holdings. Not just the restaurant. The building. The property. The waterfront real estate that had appreciated steadily since the filing date. I leaned back in my chair. The coffee had gone cold in my hands. Martin had never told me I was an owner. He'd mentioned investing in the property, said it was smart to diversify, but he'd framed it as his investment, his risk, his future. And I'd believed him, because I always believed him. But the state filing didn't lie. My name was there, legally documented, which meant the transfer agreement Brooke and Martin had been handling at Table 12 wasn't just fraud, it was personal. Brooke wasn't just some business partner. She was his ex. The woman who came before me and the one he still made room for. I pulled up a property valuation site, entered the address. The building was worth $3.2 million. My quarter share $800,000. My hand stayed steady on the keyboard, but something shifted in my chest again. That same door opening wider. I hadn't known I owned anything worth defending. Now I knew exactly what I stood to lose. I closed the laptop. Checked the time. It was just past 7. Law offices wouldn't open for another hour, but I knew someone who was always up early. Rebecca Marsh, paralegal at a small firm downtown. We'd been in community college together before I dropped out to work full-time. She'd finished, went to paralegal school. We still exchanged messages a few times a year. Nothing deep, just the kind of friendship that survived through occasional contact. I sent her a text. Need advice on a legal issue. Fraud-related. Can I call you this morning? The reply came 3 minutes later. I'm at the office by 7:30. Call then. I showered, dressed, organized the evidence into a manila folder, everything printed, everything backed up. At 7:30 exactly, I called. Rebecca answered on the second ring. Aaron. Been a while. It has, I said. Thanks for taking this. What's going on, she asked. I explained it in clinical terms. The forged signature, the notarized document, the security footage showing my husband and another woman, his ex-girlfriend, handling papers with my name on transfer agreements I'd never signed. Rebecca was quiet for a moment after I finished. Then she said, Do you have copies of everything? Yes, I said. Video, receipt, screenshots, and the state filing showing my ownership. Good. That's good. Her voice shifted into professional mode. Washington is a community property state. Any assets acquired during marriage are jointly owned unless there's a prenup. If Martin tried to transfer your ownership stake without your consent, that's fraud. And if he forged your signature on a notarized document, that's a felony. How serious, I asked. Class C felony. Up to 5 years. But realistically, first offense, no prior record. It depends on the prosecutor and the dollar amount involved. You said the property's worth over $3 million? Yes. Then your stake is substantial. That elevates it. Aggravated fraud. The notary involvement makes it worse. They falsified official documents. I sat down at the kitchen table. The folder was in front of me. Everything organized. Everything provable. What do I do next? I asked. 2 things, Rebecca said. First, secure all original documents. If there's an internal company record at the restaurant, ownership lists, partnership agreements, get copies before they're altered or destroyed. Second, consult a criminal attorney, not civil. Criminal. This isn't a divorce case. It's fraud. Can you recommend someone? I'll send you a name, she said. Catherine Lowe. She handles white-collar cases. Tell her I referred you. Thank you. Aaron, Rebecca said. Her voice softened slightly. Be careful. If Martin realizes you know he might try to move assets or pressure you, document everything. Don't confront him alone. I won't, I said. We ended the call. I sat at the table for several minutes. The apartment was silent. No traffic sounds. No footsteps from the unit above. Just the hum of the refrigerator and my own breathing. I opened my laptop again. Checked the Cascade Holdings file one more time. My name was still there. Official. Legal. Recorded? But if Martin and Brooke had already filed the fraudulent transfer with the state, my name might not be there for long. They could update the registry, Submit falsified documents. Erase me from the record entirely, unless I moved first. I stood, grabbed my jacket, slipped the folder into my bag, the USB drive into my pocket. Rebecca was right. I needed the internal records, the ones kept at Cascade. Partnership agreements, ownership lists, financial statements, anything that proved what existed before Martin tried to rewrite it, and I needed them that day Wednesday. Cascade's only closed day, the one day I could get inside without being seen. If they'd already erased me from the file, I'd know by tonight. Cascade was closed on Wednesdays, deep cleaning day. No staff except the maintenance crew and Marcus, who came in at noon to supervise. I had a key. I'd been closing manager 3 nights a week for the past 2 years. Access came with the role. It was just past 10 when I arrived, parked 2 blocks away, walked to the service entrance. The alley was empty. Trash bins lined against the brick wall. The smell of old fryer oil and damp concrete. I unlocked the door, stepped inside. The kitchen was dark, silent. The stainless steel surfaces gleamed faintly in the low emergency lighting. I moved through the space without turning on the main lights. Muscle memory guided me. Past the prep station, through the swinging door into the dining room. Past table 12, the table where Martin and his ex had laughed over wine last night while signing away my name. The back office was at the end of a short hallway. I unlocked it with the manager key, closed the door behind me, turned on the desk lamp instead of the overhead fluorescence. The filing cabinet was against the left wall, 4 drawers. The bottom 2 held financial records, tax documents, vendor contracts. The top drawer held personnel files. The second drawer held partnership documents. I opened it, pulled out the hanging folder labeled Cascade Holdings LLC Ownership. Inside were 3 documents. The original operating agreement from 6 years ago, an amendment from 3 years ago adding language about profit distribution, and a new document, crisp paper, recently printed, updated ownership structure effective October 2025. I set it on the desk, opened it under the lamp. 3 names listed: Martin Hayes, 50%, Brooke Devon, 25%, Douglas Fenwick, 25%. My name was gone. In its place, Brooke Devon, 25%. The exact percentage that had been mine according to the state filing. I read through the document carefully. It referenced a spousal consent form, dated October 20th, signed by Aaron Hayes, notarized by a certified notary in King County. 3 days ago, the same day as the receipt in my pocket, the document looked official, professional. It had been printed on firm letterhead. Signed by Martin, signed by Douglas Fenwick, signed by someone whose signature was supposed to be mine. I pulled out my phone, photographed every page, made sure the lighting was even, the text readable. Then I opened the desk drawer and found Marcus's label maker, printed a small label, quiet file. I took a fresh manila envelope from the supply shelf, placed the photographed document inside, sealed it, applied the label. Then I turned to the computer. It was still logged in from whenever Marcus had used it last. I opened the shared drive, found the folder marked Legal Holdings. Inside was a digital copy of the same ownership document. I checked the file properties. Modified date October 21st. Modified by M. Hayes. Martin had updated the file himself. Uploaded the fraudulent document. Replaced the legitimate structure with one that erased me entirely. I exported the file. Saved it to my USB. Then I checked the metadata logs. Found the previous version. Still accessible in the backup folder. I saved that too. 2 versions. One legitimate, one falsified. Both time-stamped. Both traceable. I was about to close the program when I saw a subfolder I hadn't noticed before, labeled Devon Correspondence. I clicked it open. Inside were 6 emails, all between Martin and Brooke, dated over the past 2 months. I opened the most recent one. From Martin Hayes. To Brooke Devon, date October 19, subject finalization Brooke, notary appointment confirmed for Sunday. Bring the amended operating agreement and transfer forms. Once filed, the restructure is complete. Fenwick's already signed off. E won't be an issue. E won't be an issue. I stared at the screen, read the line again. He'd written it casually, confidently, as if I was an obstacle that could be managed. Moved aside, erased with paperwork and a forged signature. I copied the email, saved it to the USB. Then I checked the trash folder, found a draft Martin had written but never sent. From Martin Hayes. To Brooke Devon, date September 30. Subject reinvestment opportunity. You're right. It's cleaner if we consolidate ownership before moving forward with the expansion. He's been checked out for years. She won't question it. Once the transfer is filed, Cascade is ours to leverage. I read it twice. Then I saved it. Ours to leverage? They'd been planning this for weeks, maybe longer. Restructuring ownership, positioning themselves to use the property value for their own purposes. And they'd assumed I would never notice. Never question. Never fight back. Because I'd been serving their table, pouring their wine, playing the role they'd assigned me. I closed the files, logged out of the computer, turned off the desk lamp. The office returned to shadow. I stood in the darkness for a moment. The envelope in my hands, the USB in my pocket, everything documented, everything preserved. Martin had underestimated what invisibility could gather. He thought silence meant ignorance, that I was too distracted by work and too accustomed to his control to see what was happening in my own life. But I'd been trained to observe, to notice details, to remember faces and orders and preferences. That training had made me very good at watching, at cataloging, at seeing patterns others assumed I'd miss. And now I had everything I needed. I walked back through the dining room, out the service door, locked it behind me. The alley was still empty, the city still quiet. Morning light filtered through the clouds in shades of gray and silver. I drove home, uploaded the new files to my secure folder, printed the emails, added them to the quiet file envelope. By noon, I had a complete record. Video footage, internal documents showing before and after, emails proving premeditation, metadata proving when files were altered and by whom, everything a prosecutor would need, everything a judge would understand. They'd built a future without me, but they'd built it on my name. Martin came home Thursday evening at 6. I heard his key in the lock, the sound of his briefcase hitting the floor in the entryway. I was sitting at the kitchen table, coffee in front of me, cold, the manila folder labeled quiet file beside my left hand. He walked in, loosened his tie, saw me sitting there. "Hey," he said. "Long day." I didn't answer. He opened the refrigerator, pulled out a bottle of water, unscrewed the cap, drank half of it standing at the counter. "You working tonight?" he asked. "No," I said. He nodded. "Set the bottle down?" Finally looked at me directly. His eyes moved to the folder on the table. "What's that?" "Documents," I said. "From Cascade Holdings." His expression didn't change, but something shifted in his posture. A slight stiffening in his shoulders. "Why do you have those?" "Because my name is on them," I said. Or it was. "Before you changed it." Silence. The apartment was quiet. No traffic noise from the street below. The faint hum of the refrigerator. Just the sound of Martin's breathing and the faint buzz of the overhead light. He walked to the table, pulled out the chair across from me, sat down slowly. "Aaron," he said. His voice was calm, measured. The tone he used when explaining investments or business decisions. "I don't know what you think you found, but I found the transfer agreement," I said. "The one you and Brooke signed at table 12 Tuesday night. The one with my forged signature on the spousal consent form." His face went still. "I also found the receipt from the Capitol Hill copy shop," I continued. "The one showing notarization services on Sunday, and the emails between you and Brooke. The ones where you said I wouldn't be an issue." Martin leaned back in his chair. His hands rested on the table, flat, steady, but his jaw tightened. "You went through my files." "I went through Cascade's files," I said. "The ones I have access to as closing manager. The ones that show you modified the ownership structure without my knowledge or consent." "Aaron," his voice softened, took on that familiar patient quality. The one that used to make me feel like I was overreacting. "This is more complicated than you understand. Brooke and I were restructuring the partnership to allow for expansion. We needed to consolidate ownership to secure financing. It's standard business practice." "Standard business practice includes forging signatures?" He exhaled, rubbed his face with both hands. When he looked at me again, his expression had shifted. Less patient, more calculating. "What do you want?" he asked. "I want you to understand that I know," I said. "I know what you did. I know when you did it. I know who helped you. And I have proof." "Proof?" "Video footage time-stamped, clear enough to read document titles and your faces at table 12, I said. "Internal files showing before and after versions of the ownership structure. Emails proving premeditation. Metadata showing you modified the files yourself." Martin's hands had stopped moving. They rested on the table, motionless. "You're making a mistake," he said quietly. "No," I said. "You made the mistake. You assumed I wouldn't notice. That I'd be too busy serving tables and folding napkins to see what you were doing with property that's legally mine. Legally yours. He said it like the words tasted wrong. Aaron, you didn't invest $1 in that building. I put up the capital. I took the risk. Your name went on the filing as a formality, for tax purposes. Then you should have told me that 6 years ago, I said. Instead, you put my name on the state registry, which means Washington law recognizes me as a 25% owner, and transferring my ownership without my consent is fraud. He stood up, walked to the window, stared out at the city. What do you want? He asked again. His voice was quieter now, tired. I want you to know I've already retained a criminal attorney. We meet tomorrow at 9, and I've sent over the files. Under Washington law, forging a notarized signature on a property transfer is a Class C felony. Martin turned. His face had gone pale. You're threatening me. No, I said. I'm telling you what happens next. I stood, picked up the folder, walked past him toward the bedroom. Aaron, I stopped. Didn't turn around. If you file a complaint, he said, this becomes public. The firm will drop me. My reputation, everything I've built, it's over. Yes, I said. And what do you get out of that? I looked back at him. He was standing by the window, backlit by the fading evening light, his face in shadow. I get my name back, I said. I went to the bedroom, closed the door, sat on the edge of the bed with my phone in my hand. I'd been recording the entire conversation. Voice memo app started before he came home. 42 minutes of audio, every word, every admission. Catherine had already confirmed Washington is a one-party consent state. I could record conversations I was part of without the other person's knowledge. Admissible in court. Admissible as evidence. I saved the file, backed it up to the cloud, sent a copy to Catherine's encrypted email. Then I packed a bag. Not much. Just enough for a few days. Clothes. Toiletries. The quiet file envelope. When I came back out, Martin was still standing by the window. He didn't turn when I walked through the living room. Didn't say anything when I opened the front door. I left the apartment, took the elevator down, walked to my car. The air outside was cold, clear, the kind of October night that felt like a beginning instead of an ending. I drove to a hotel near the waterfront, checked in under my own name, paid with my own card. The room was small, clean, anonymous. I set the bag on the bed, sat in the chair by the window, looked out at the city lights reflecting on Elliott Bay. Martin had taught me silence, how to stay quiet, how to serve without being seen, how to accept his version of reality without question. He'd taught me silence. He just never imagined I'd use it better than him. Catherine Lowe's office was downtown, 12th floor, windows overlooking Pioneer Square. I arrived Friday morning at 9, carried the quiet file envelope and the USB drive. Everything organized, everything ready. Catherine was in her 40s, sharp suit, short gray hair. She shook my hand with the grip of someone who had spent years in courtrooms. Aaron, she said, Rebecca spoke highly of you. Let's see what we have. We sat at the conference table. I laid out the evidence piece by piece. The notarized receipt from the copy shop. The CCTV footage showing Martin and Brooke handling the documents at table 12. The internal files from Cascade showing the ownership structure before and after. The emails proving premeditation. The metadata logs showing Martin had modified the files himself. And the recording from last night. Martin's voice admitting the restructure. His acknowledgement that my name was on the state filing. His question, what do you want? Catherine listened to the full audio without interrupting. When it finished, she looked at me. This is solid, she said. Very solid. You've documented everything correctly. Chain of custody is clean. The recording is admissible. And the forgery is clear. What happens next? I asked. I file a criminal complaint with the King County Prosecutor's Office, she said. I'll include all of this evidence. The prosecutor will review it and decide whether to charge. Given the dollar amount and the notarization fraud, I'd say charges are likely. Class C felony for Martin. Possibly Brooke as well if she knew the signature was forged. How long does that take? A few weeks for the initial review. Then arraignment. Then pretrial motions. But here's what happens immediately. She pulled out a legal pad. Started writing. I'll file an emergency motion to freeze the property. That prevents Martin or Brooke from transferring or leveraging Cascade Holdings while the case is pending. I'll also notify the Secretary of State that the October ownership filing was fraudulent. They'll flag it pending investigation. And my ownership stake? Remains intact, Catherine said. The fraudulent transfer is void. You're still a 25% owner according to the legitimate filing. Once the criminal case moves forward, you can file a civil suit for damages. Fraud. Breach of fiduciary duty. Emotional distress. I nodded. The words settled in my chest. Solid. Real. Catherine slid a document across the table. This is an affidavit. You'll need to sign it. It states under penalty of perjury that you did not sign the transfer agreement, that you did not consent to the ownership change, that the signature was forged. I read through it carefully. 3 pages. Legal language, but clear. Direct. True. I picked up the pen. Signed my name at the bottom. Real signature. My handwriting. Not forged. Not falsified. Catherine witnessed it. Stamped it with her notary seal. We're filing today, she said. By Monday, Martin and Brooke will be notified. The property will be frozen. And the investigation begins. I left her office at 10:30. Walked to my car. Drove to Cascade. The restaurant didn't open until 5 on Fridays, but I still had my key. I let myself in through the front entrance. I disarmed the alarm with the closing code and stepped into the empty dining room. The dining room was empty. Tables reset. Chairs in place. Afternoon light coming through the windows in long golden angles. The same light I'd watched for 8 years while serving wine and clearing plates and pretending not to notice conversations that excluded me. I walked to table 12. Stood beside it. The corner booth with the view of Elliott Bay. The table where Martin and Brooke had signed documents with my name, where they'd planned their future without me. The table where I'd seen the envelope. Memorized the angle. Started gathering evidence. In the staff room, I took my apron off its hook, the one I'd worn for 8 years, folded it carefully, and set it on table 12. Then I walked to the back office, opened the filing cabinet, removed my personnel file, my certifications, my performance reviews, everything with my name. I didn't take anything else, just what was mine. On my way out, I stopped at the host stand, wrote a brief note on Cascade Stationery. Marcus, effective immediately, I'm resigning my position. Thank you for the opportunity. Aaron Hayes. I left the note on his desk, left my key beside it, walked out through the front door. The waterfront was quiet, tourists walking, seagulls calling, the smell of salt water and coffee from the cafes along the pier. I stood on the sidewalk for a moment, looked back at Cascade through the windows, the dining room, the bar, the kitchen beyond. I had spent 8 years in that building, serving, watching, learning how to be invisible. And in the end, that invisibility had been the most useful thing Martin ever taught me. By Monday afternoon, Catherine called. The complaint was filed. The property was frozen. Martin and Brooke had been notified. Charges were pending review. By Tuesday, Martin's firm had placed him on administrative leave pending investigation. By Wednesday, Brooke had resigned from the investment group she worked with. Reputation damage. Legal liability. I didn't follow the case closely after that. Catherine handled the details. The arraignment, the pretrial motions, the eventual plea negotiations. I focused on other things. Finding a new job, a smaller restaurant, better tips, no ownership complications, no husbands at table 12. I found an apartment in Capitol Hill, 1 bedroom, big windows, a view of nothing in particular. But it was mine, my name on the lease, my furniture, my rules. 3 months later, Catherine called with the settlement offer. Martin and Brooke had agreed to plead guilty to fraud charges in exchange for probation and restitution. No jail time, but permanent records, felony convictions, and my ownership stake restored, plus damages, plus legal fees. I accepted the settlement, signed the papers, closed the chapter. On a Sunday morning in January, I walked past Cascade. It was open for brunch, the dining room full, people laughing, glasses clinking, the rhythm of service visible through the windows. I didn't go inside. Didn't need to. I just kept walking. Past the restaurant, past the waterfront, past the life I'd built around Martin's version of who I was supposed to be. He once told me he saved me from that apron, that I was lucky he found me, that without him, I'd still be working double shifts at diners where the tips were small and the work was hard. He'd been wrong. The work was always hard. The tips were never enough. And I'd never needed saving. I just needed to learn that silence could be evidence. That invisibility could be power. That watching and waiting and documenting could be more effective than any confrontation. Martin taught me how to serve without being seen, but I learned how to see everything he didn't think I was watching. And in the end, that made all the difference. Silence used to protect him. Now it protects me. Thank you for staying with me until the end. If this story spoke to you, please hit the like button. Your support helps us bring more stories like this to life.